Hello, my fabulous friends, and welcome to all those who are new. My name is Cassie, and today we're going to be doing some stamping and watercoloring. I recently posted this project over on Facebook and Instagram using Gina K's new Warmest Winter Wishes stamp set, and I got a lot of questions about it, so I thought I'd show you how I made the card. This stamp set was sent to me by the company, but my opinions remain my own. I'm using the Gina K stamp set, Warmest Winter Wishes, and I will have a link below for that. And I'm using these single image trees. It does have that beautiful scene stamp, but I'm just using those side images. I'm working on some Arches cold press watercolor paper. I like the rough texture of it, but any watercolor paper would work. For the snow, I'm using Daniel Smith's Kyanite Genuine. It's a beautiful blue-gray color that has a lot of variations from its darkest and its lightest colors, and a little bit of subtle sparkle. I'm starting by adding some dark color and creating the idea of a hillside. When you're painting snow, you're painting more the shadows than anything else, so leave a lot of highlights. This looks really messy right now, but don't overthink it. Just add in some lines and some squiggles and it will be fine. I'm then taking some clean water on my brush and just softening some of those harsh lines out. Make sure you leave some nice white highlights and don't be afraid of dark shadows. You can see when you step back, you can see the idea of that hillside and a little bit of snow in the background. That's what we're looking for. I'm going to go ahead and dry this with my heat gun. I like to dry it from the top and from the back to minimize the curling that happens. Okay, now that our paper is dry, we can start stamping. I'm going to grab the stamp set and just choose a couple of the trees that I want to work with. I'm going to peel those off and I'm going to put them on acrylic blocks. I find that working on acrylic blocks is just easier with this technique. I'm just going to lay them down on the block and press down. Then I'm going to grab some distress inks, and I've just grabbed a few browns and a few greens. For my first tree, I'm going to be working with some ground espresso and forest moss. I'm going to start with the forest moss and ink up the branches of the tree. It's okay if you get some on the trunk, it's all going to work out, but try to keep the green focused up on the branches, and then take the ground espresso and tap into the trunk. That way we have two colors of ink. I'm going to put a little bit more green on there. And then choose where you want your first little happy tree to be. I'm going to put mine right here and press down. Don't worry if the impression isn't perfect. We're not looking for a perfectly stamped image. We're just looking for ink on the page and the general idea of the tree shape. We'll fix it later. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that same process with a second tree. I'm going to stamp that slightly offset from the first one to give a little bit of dimension. While distress ink isn't always the best ink for stamping, especially on watercolor paper, it is fabulous for techniques like this one. Just taking a damp brush, and I am dancing that brush across the paper. This is going to reactivate the distress ink and turn it into a liquid watercolor. So I'm dancing across. I'm not trying to fill in the whole thing. I'm leaving some gaps and some imperfections, and I'm just letting that brush skip and dance across the paper. You can see the first tree that I painted is turning out a little bit lighter because there was less ink on the stamp, and that will just give variety and contrast to your trees. I've left this part in real time so you can see just how quickly this comes together. Again, we're not looking for a perfectly filled in tree. Leave those little gaps and those little imperfections because it will make the tree look more natural. For the tree trunks, I'm going to do the same thing with a clean, damp brush, except for instead of dancing the brush, I'm just going to brush it up and down and follow the line of the trunk. I think I want to add a third tree in of this style tree, so I'm going to use those same colors and repeat that same process. Brown on the trunk, green on the branches, and stamp it, and then paint it. Let's zoom you in a little bit for this one so you can see what my brush is doing while I'm painting the tree. You can see I'm bouncing it and dancing it along the surface. I actually find this really relaxing and fun to do. Now let's add some variety to our forest. I'm going to switch to a different tree. I'm going to use the same brown, so the ground espresso, for my tree trunk. But for my green, I think I'm going to use some rustic wilderness. That'll give me some nice dark contrast. And the tree will have a slightly different silhouette to it. So I'm adding in that tree trunk. This trunk you see a little bit more higher up as well. So I'm going to make sure to add in a little bit of brown up at the top too. And then I want to put this tree a little bit behind the trees that I've already stamped. To do that, I'm going to very loosely mask off the trees that I've already stamped. I'm not doing anything precise. I haven't fussy cut anything. I'm just putting a little bit of paper there to protect the first tree. And I'm going to line that tree up and press down to stamp it. You can see that it looks like it's behind that first tree. I soften those branches out with the clean water again. I want to get a little bit more brown in that trunk up near the top, so I'm going to press my ink pad against my acrylic block to transfer some of the ink. And I'm going to pick up the ink from there and paint in some of those brown colors. For a little balance, I'm going to add a little bit of a tree sticking off of the edge on the right side. So I don't need to ink up the entire tree, just a little bit of that tree. And I'm going to protect my work surface with that scrap paper and just press down. Sorry, my camera went out of focus there. Press down so that you get just a few branches sticking onto the edge. This helps create the idea that the scene is much larger than what you can actually see. The distress inks will clean up very easily. Just wipe them off of your stamps and you are good to go. Now that we have our trees in place, the ground is looking a little barren. So I'm going to grab a small acrylic block and that little bush stamp and put that on my block. And I'm going to use the same ground espresso just to keep all of my colors harmonious. Ink that up and start stamping that into my scene. I'm going to use first and second generations for this, so some of them are going to be darker than others. I like to keep the darker ones up near the front of the scene and the lighter ones a little bit further back. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just adding in some ink and the idea of a bush. I'm going to soften that out with my brush, just like I did with the trees. I'm also going to add in just a little bit of Kyanite to these bushes for a little bit of shadow and variation. It will mix in well with that brown. At this point, it's time to add in some shadows. I just take from the base of the stamp and drag out a line, a splotch of color. Doesn't have to be perfect. Try and get all your shadows going the same direction. If you do have a shadow that's going in a very odd direction, you can go ahead and just add some water to that and really soften it out. Maybe dab it up with a paper towel, and it should come off quite nicely. And then you can add your shadow back in. I'm also going to add just a little bit of Kyanite to the base of each of the trees just to make it feel like they are sitting inside the snow. Now that I have the majority of my image done, I can see that I don't have a very good horizon line and it kind of fades into nothing. So I'm going to add just a little bit of color across the back to give it that edge of the ground, and I'm going to soften that up into the sky. I'm going to dry everything again with my heat gun to make sure everything is completely dry before I move on to my next step. And the next step is adding a little bit of snow. So I'm going to take my Kyanite and get a nice juicy wash on my brush and just flick in some splatters. It's hard to see on camera, but in real life this makes a huge difference. I don't want a ton of splatters, just the hints of splatters here and there. And I will quickly clean up my desk before these spots dry on my table, and then I will dry this with the heat gun again. To frame my card panel, I like to draw a line around the edge of the card. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't use a ruler, I just hand-drawn line. and I go around the edge of the card, leaving a little bit of a border. It's a really simple way to frame your panels. When I come to that tree that's sticking out over the edge, I'm going to skip over the tree so I'm not drawing through the tree. And I'll continue my line down and finish off my frame. For my sentiment, I will be pulling out my Misty. Stamping on watercolor paper can be tricky because of the texture. The Misty ensures that I can get a really good impression, even with that fine detailed sentiment stamp. So I'm going to go ahead and line that up in the bottom corner and choose my sentiment stamp. I'm using the Warmest Wishes sentiment, but there's some other fabulous sentiments included in this set as well. So I'm going to pick that up with the lid of my Misty, and then I'm going to use my favorite trick for checking placement. I'm going to put a piece of acetate in over top of my card, and then I will stamp onto the acetate. This allows me to see what it will look like before actually stamping it onto the card. I'm happy with the placement of that, so I'm going to move my acetate out of the way and stamp my sentiment onto my card. Because it is watercolor paper, I am going to do a second stamp to get that nice dark, crisp line. All that's left to do now is put it on my A2 card base. I typically use a combination of dry adhesive and wet adhesive. I find that for me, that holds up the best. So I put in some dry adhesive and a little bit of wet adhesive in there and then press down. And there is your finished card. See how simple that was? I absolutely love this set. You can see, I get close, the sparkle of that Kyanite. It's so beautiful. I hope this answered your questions and inspired you to do some of your own painting with your stamps. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what you thought or what you would like to see next. If you want to see more from me, make sure you subscribe and click that notification bell. I hope you have a wonderfully creative day, and I will see you soon.